observations?
Yeah, I think one of the things that struck me is the fact that if you don't identify your problem really clearly and concisely and definitively, you spend the rest of your proposal trying to get back to what the issue is because you haven't got that clear in your mind. It's like if you get your problem clear, you jump in the stream and you can swim, and it's a lot easier to follow that stream down. But if you don't get the problem right away, you're always kind of running along the bank, trying to get into the water as you get, and it gets foggy down the road when you get to your research questions and your operational questions, because they aren't clear because your problem hasn't been really defined. And I noticed this in one or two instances where the problem was foggy, and so then the whole research design kind of got fogged up a little bit.
But that is such a crucial thing. And it will be also true of your next paper if you don't get your hypothesis pinned down well, so that your operationalization of your independent variable and your clear indication of what the observable phenomenon that you're going to look for at the end, the outcome, the dependent variable. If you're not clear on that, stating that hypothesis, you can actually work yourself silly trying to make it clear up in your proposal, and it won't clear up well. So you just have to spend time at the front end. That's one reason we spent a whole day in here trying to get some understanding of how you understand the relationship between a topic of concern that you're reading about, talking about, thinking about, and the particular research question that you want to focus because of a given research problem. And by the way, there were more serious errors in terms of sloppy research problems than in research questions. Many of you had sloppy research problems, but began to clear it up by making somewhat better research questions. But any paper that's got a criticism of your research problem is of the sort we're talking about. It's a potential loser in the long run. And the papers that were at the bottom of the heap had the worst research problem statements. So it correlates rather well with the grades you see up here.
There was just one other issue, and that was, I was expecting a research question and then your operational questions, and some of you didn't differentiate between the two. You only had either, you called them research questions and then never had the operational question, but I think that's an important distinction too, because one is looking at data and the other is looking at the overall question you want to answer.
I need a little more
Thank you.
illumination on that distinction.
A little more, okay. Do you want to do that, Ted, distinguish?
What's the problem? What's the question?
I don't quite understand how research and operational questions differ.
Okay? You understand what a research problem is. A research problem is something that will be dealt with if you can come to some understanding of this research question and this one, or at least this one. Okay? So the research question then is the crucial focal point for your understandings in relationship to this research problem. But it asks a question quite often that is not explicit with regard to exactly what you're going to have to ask or what information you're going to have to collect. It implies that, and by the time you think it through, it's pretty clear. In order to answer that question, I'm going to have this particular information, and this particular information, and this particular information. Now, why do I need those pieces of information then? Not because they're inherent in the research problem somehow, but because they're inherent in the research question. All right? Now then, the problem is that very rarely can a really good research question be asked directly of one source and get the answer to that research question. The OQs are the places you think through. This is a thought process, it's a reasoning process, and you say, what will I need to have in the way of information from this, that, or the other sources in order to answer that research question? Does that make sense? And quite often the secret here is understanding that the RQs are focal And the OQs can be scattered in terms of different sources where you're going to have to go for different information. The illustration I made of this thing still holds. Our problem is knowing what to anticipate in the way of weather at the end of this class. Is it going to be cooler, hotter, rainy, or what at the end of this hour? That's the research question. The problem is being able to anticipate the weather at the end of this class. The research question is, will it be rainy? What are the odds that it will be rainy? What are the odds that it will be cooler? Now those are the big research questions. So what do? I go out here and interview everybody on campus. And I say, what do you think? And I get opinions. And lo and behold, it turns out that lots of people believe different kinds of things. And furthermore, it doesn't sound like anybody's very well connected with any kind of empirical reality. But I have a poll. It's the way, the president discovers morality. He goes out and interviews people. It's kind of dumb. Now instead, I'm going to try to find some operational questions that I can get empirical data on. Can anybody suggest what the operational questions for that particular research, that pair of research questions really is? Operational questions are, what data do I need and where would I get it? Help me, come on.
What is the phone number? I'll need to call the radio station that has the meteorologist and get his prophecy.
All right, that's certainly a valid way to go if you want to go that way. Let's assume, however, we've decided to restrict ourselves to available data in context. All right? And this man over here says what I need to do is find out what the temperature is now. Is that an empirical question? Does that empirical question by itself answer the research question? That's the difference between an OQ and an RQ. If it were answer to the RQ, we're done. But it's only an adding of one piece where we need several. What are the other OQs that we need to deal with?
Sky cloudy.
Pardon?
Is the sky cloudy?
Is the sky cloudy? Now, okay, that's another one. Will that tell us if it's going to rain at the end of the class? No, we've got to have to get some others. But that's two of them. We get two of those by looking at the thermometer and by looking at the sky. All right? What else do we need to know in order to answer the OQ, or the RQ?
Wind blowing?
And sooner or later, after we do all that arraying of what is it like now, in terms of the particular things we want to observe about now, we also need to ask a question about what was true an hour ago. Does that make sense? Now, none of those questions by themselves answer the RQ. But the collection of that information will give you the data on which to make an answer that is grounded in reality for the RQ. Does that make sense? The RQ, then, is the focal point of that information. Because our problem is knowing what it's going to be like when we get done here. What is the weather going to be when we get out of here? So we look at variables that we need to get data on, and then we look at the particular data we need to get, so we can line it up and say, I got to get this, tick it off, this, tick it off, this, tick it off, this, tick it off. We tick it all off, we line it all up, we analyze it, we compile it, and by golly, we have an answer then for our OQ, for our RQ.
Ted, there's still one other section in our proposal that includes questions, and that will be our protocol. Is that correct? Now, our protocol, will it be informed by those operational questions?
Absolutely.
But they can include the operational questions.
Absolutely. Because it doesn't follow that when I'm asking the thermometer that I will actually have an interview protocol, would you believe? But when I'm dealing with human beings, I'm going to have an interview protocol because I've got to have a way to talk about these things in such a way that the person will be free to bring data to me. Now, if I treat that person like some kind of a punch button computer and say, what do you think about the red tide? Very little. I think very little of the red tide. What about the red tide? Thank you very much for your answer to the first question. Now the second question is, what do you think about the king of Egypt? I don't know much about the kingdom. Thank you very much for the next question. Now for the third question. I mean, that's called an oral questionnaire. You follow me? Where it's free to say, I don't know anything about it. What's the difference between that and an interview?
You want to create questions that will bring up discussion and more data than just a simple answer.
Right. With a great deal of capacity to follow the fox through the forest. So we don't start off by saying, what do you know about the red tide? We say, have you ever heard of some of the things that happen in estuaries and open basins that infect fish and destroy wildlife? Like, for example, the red tide. Is that familiar with you at all? The person says, gee, I've never heard of it. Well, then I got to back up a little bit and say, well, let me fill you in just a little bit about what red tide is all about. Because I want to ask you some questions about how you stand on the controlling of red tide. And the interview protocol is one in which I can move forward or move back, depending on the knowledgeability of this person. And that's why it's a protocol, not a questionnaire. A protocol means that it is a guidance plan for the interview. Now, how does protocol relate to research inquiry? Protocol is a patterned way to behave. So why do we call it a research protocol? Because it's a patterned way to behave. Who behaved? Who behaved? The interviewer, exactly. It's the patterned way for the interviewer to behave. And it's different from a questionnaire because if you're doing an oral questionnaire, you just pop in the question. But if you have an orderly, patterned way to behave, you have plans about if I get this kind of answer, I go this way with it. If I have this kind of answer, I go that way with it. Person says, I don't know anything about red tide. What do? Quit? No, I back up. I say my plan is to back up and explain red tide and then start over again. You see it? That's a protocol. That's why we talk about a protocol. What does a protocol have on it then? One of the reasons why I'm spending time with this is because you need this for your experimental research too. What do you want to see in a protocol? Two kinds of things. Two levels of stuff.
Themes.
Themes, good. And
Prompt
probes or prompts. Prompt questions, yeah. Themes and probes. Give me an example of a theme in an interview. Imagine an interview with anybody and say, okay, I'm gonna want to find out about such and such. What's the theme? For example, Donna's going to do an interview with dorm supervisors, resident supervisors of dormitories, okay? And what is it you might want to talk with them about, find from it? Give me an idea of the kinds of things you might want to find.
Leadership ability.
Talk about their relationship or reaction to students. Let's talk about students as they see students. And these are for us to illustrate.
Okay. What? Say that again.
Is it relationship with the other sex,
Okay.
opposite sex? Give me an example of that. What would you like to get them talking about?
Whether they feel like the amount of interaction that they have with people of the opposite sex is satisfactory.
Okay. All right. How could you approach that from a standpoint of an oral questionnaire? Number one, you pull out a piece of paper and you say, I want to ask you some questions. First question on here is,
How much time do you spend with the sex?
Yeah.
is that right?
Yep.
Ah, okay. What does that translate to in a week? Oh, okay. 6 hours. All right, 6 hours. Now that's oral questionnaire. Don't waste an interview doing that. How would you approach it in an interview? The topic would be what? Time, quality, substance of your interactions with the opposite sex. That's the topic. That's the theme. Lily, that's the theme. How could you get into that? Lots of ways. And if you know your subject well enough, you won't get at it, you won't get into it exactly the same way with any two people. You're going to get into it more conversationally. Now, after you're into it, you have to already have thought through what kinds of things you want to hear them particularly talk about. Time, kinds of activities with the opposite sex, that's two things right there. So I need a probe on time, amount of time in a week. I need a probe on kinds of activities. Probe is something like this. So what can you tell me about what you do in that 6 hours a week? Or if they've given me the kinds of things they do, my probe is, so what does that add up to in terms of time in the week? Those are probes. Probes are the things you tick off in order to touch the bases you want to touch in relationship to that theme. And what is the theme again? Time, quality, and substance of relationship with the opposite sex. All right? Now, in any one interview, how many themes can you deal with? This is obviously an arbitrary question. What is your answer to this one? 5. Aha. I wonder how many of the rest of you would agree. How many themes can you deal with pretty much safely, but you probably will be in trouble if you get too far beyond it? How many themes can you deal with in the typical time that you will allocate for an interview?
3.
3? So we got 5, you got 3. Anybody else want to put up a guess?
Well, it might depend on how much time you have for an interview.
Of course. Of
Might
course.
not be able to do one.
Right. But most interviews begin to dwindle in terms of their intensity, in terms of their productivity at a certain point. And beyond that, you push it, not much happens. So we have kind of a natural cycle of rhythm in most interviews, and we need to find out with a given group how things are going to work. But in general, I recommend a guideline of 5. And so I knew this. I think you paid attention in 923, didn't you? Yeah. Yeah. Get out of here. Okay, and one of the reasons I do this is because it's so memorable. Think of what the good Lord gave you as a guide for your interview. This works. I go through this in more detail in the 923, but it works, by golly. If you could assign to each finger and thumb a theme and kind of name it, or even if you have to write it on there. I often have to write it on the first 2 or 3 interviews because I don't remember things very well, so I kind of write them on here. And that way I can come in without notepad and without this intimidating thing like a clipboard. Oh my goodness, clipboards. Oh, designed to intimidate the person you're interviewing. Got to ask you a few questions, you know, here. And after that, we'll take your blood sample and ask you to pee in the jar. Good grief, what are you trying to do? No, you come at people and you say, I need to talk to you about some things. I need to talk to you some things about the relationships in the dorm, how things are working out and all this. You got to sit down, you got to have about 30 minutes. If you have the time now, let's sit down and talk. Then I pull out my hand and I say, and there's my themes, laying right down there. And a person has already sat down and said, well, I'm so glad that you want to talk about this because I tell you, there's some things going on that are really driving me berserk. What am I supposed to do about so-and-so? Now, what do I do with that? She's responded this way, and she's off and running. The interview hasn't started. What do I do, Donna?
Just let her know that you hear what she's saying, but then just try to bring it back around and see if you're thinking.
Or be thankful she's into theme 4 and go with it. Because I can see how that relates to theme 4. But the point is, I've got some other knuckles here. These are my other probes, other things within 4 that I want to get at. And if you assign your knuckles or your finger hinges to some of these, you can find that that's the theme, and I'm using these 3 finger hinges to remember 3 sub-themes. On this one, I'm using all 4 joint ends. On this one, I'm only using the first 2. You'd be surprised. If you're doing the interview 3 or 4 or 5 times, you'll very quickly learn your roadmap. And your fingers remind you, sometimes just persons, you would like to start out here ideally. But sometimes it works out better to start where the student, or where the interviewee started. Just put a thumb there and lock it. Say, okay, that's where we are. I'll try to remember that. But we got to get back to this, this, and this, but we're going to start here. And that kind of a flexible approach makes you a much quicker responding interviewer. Now, at some other point, we'll talk about how you get such data, how you reduce it to field notes, how you record the field notes, and so forth. But in general, We don't recommend using tape recorders to do interviews. Tape recorders do stilt the data that you get. I also should mention at this point that one of the things I noticed that about 4 of you used or suggested using focus groups. Focus groups is kind of like a cooperative interview or discussion. There's a real problem there in that people are generally different in the information they will give you in a focus group and what they'll give you in an individual interview. Generally, in a focus group, people do a lot of showing off, especially people of certain ages. High school students and younger college students use focus groups to show off how much they know about something or a particular bizarre opinion about it that they're testing out now. So that they've already shocked their mother with it, they want to shock you with it, they want to see the shock value, so they really sound like they believe it in a focus group. But if you get them in an individual interview, they don't do as much of that kind of stuff. So individual interviews generally are far better, but focus groups are valuable if you are suspicious a little bit about the group effect. Got it? But any of this kind of handling information gathering, where you show a lot of attention to the respondent, and you don't spend a lot of time sitting there writing notes, and you don't scare the living daylights out of them by turning on a tape recorder, you will get more data and you will get deeper data. The problem is that you've got to have a fairly disciplined memory, and you have to have a very standard way to quickly, what I call, dump that data, because it'll cloud your memory, and you want to do 2 of those focus groups, one after the other, and then try to create your field notes. You'll be wishing that you turned the tape recorder off. So it's a bad technique. Don't do any more than 1 interview, 1 focus group before you do your field notes. How long does it take to do field notes on a 30-minute interview?
At least 30 minutes.
You are right. It takes at least 30 minutes unless you learn how to do it and teach yourself how to do it onto a tape recorder. But if you take, after I've done this interview, never mind what order we actually talked about these things as I was working with this person, I'm going to dump that onto the tape recorder from my outline that is right there. It's my handy outline. I'm going to dump it onto the data as I talk through. John in this interview said this about this, said this about this, said this about this. He said, and I remember distinctly, quote, this and this and this and this and this, and unquote. Put the quote on there. Do you know that's even admissible in a court of law if it's done in what's called, in legal terms, a contemporaneous notation? It's regarded as testimony. And what is contemporaneous? Something that is done promptly in the incident. And immediate tape recording qualifies. And if you get good at it, you can actually quote and use quote marks in your work. So after the interview, after the focus group, you go to your tape recorder and turn your tape recorder on in private. Many's the interview I've done sitting on the front seat of my car after an interview. I'll go out to the car after the interview, turn on my tape recorder, and buzz it on and buzz it off, sentence by sentence, and create my field notes for that experience. Type that stuff, and you're already way down the road on analysis. Why is that better than verbatim recording? Verbatim recording says, I got the recording on. All right, John, I'm going to interview. I'm sure you don't mind if I turn the tape recorder on. By the way, you always say it that way. I'm sure you won't mind. And then what John said. Oh, no, that's all right. Go ahead. And what is John actually saying down deep inside?
Why was she happy?
If he does, I'm going to give him what a tape recorder ought to hear. And you'd find out, I get so confused by people coming to me and saying, I used a tape recorder and nobody minded. Didn't I tell you in advance that they wouldn't mind? That's not the point. They gave you different data, but they didn't mind. Did you mind that they gave you different data? That's the issue. Now, if I pop that recorder on and off, field noting a 30-minute interview, how many minutes will it take me? And the answer is not 30. Between 10 and 15. Because I'm already synthesizing, I'm already condensing, I'm already selecting. You're going to have to do that anyway. The difference between a verbatim tape recording and a field notes approach is that in the verbatim, you've got all the original sound and time to listen to again. And then you're going to have to start winnowing it down. You say, oh, but I'm going to type it up. Okay, there's another block of time. Then what are you going to do? I'm going to read it. Then what are you going to do? Well, then I'm going to try to decide what's important in it. I'm just saying, cut out the middle stages and get to it. You'll never have a keener sense of what's important than you do right after that interview. You might as well go to it then. And then you're way down the road procedurally. Follow me? Believe me, it works.
And how does a telephone interview differ from a face?
Okay, when I do a telephone interview, good question. You can, if you ask permission, you can tape record the telephone interview. There are very strict interstate laws against tape recording a telephone conversation out of state without provable permission.
Or on
It
tape
can be,
recorder?
but it can be oral, but you got to be able to prove it. You need either permission on that tape or you need it in writing.
And does that tape then appear less?
Let's think about that. Bob, you know, you and I have talked several times about turkeys, but this time I want to talk seriously because I really need some data here from our research. So I want to talk about turkeys very seriously. And if you don't mind, I'll record it. Now, I hope you don't mind. And then Bob says, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, sure, go ahead. Now, so I report back and I say, hey, he didn't mind. The question is, do you really mind the fact that he changed his data level? He will. He will, because he knows that tape recorder's running. When I do an oral interview, when I do an interview on a telephone, and some of the manuals are written this way now. There's growing literature on telephone interviewing, and some of them are written this way and others are not. But I think the ones that are not have yet something to learn. And I've done a lot of telephone interviewing. I use a start-stop recorder, and I put it by my cheek. And I hold the telephone in the other hand, and I have my guide down here, because I can't see my hand because I've got a telephone in it. So I write the stuff down here, and this is my protocol, all right? I did 100 interviews for a study I did for the AABC, 104 interviews, as a matter of fact, of presidents of the colleges, Bible colleges in the nation in Canada. 30 minutes apiece. I did all those interviews in 4.5 weeks on the side, including getting to the people making the reservations for the conversation. I did all that by myself. Then I had a secretary type my field notes. Now, what were my field notes? It's a whiz-bang technique. Dr. Johnson, I want you to know, I need to make record of some of the things that we're going to talk about. I have a tape recorder by my side, and let you listen to it click. Let me tell you how I'm going to use it. I will not record even one word of what you say. I don't need your permission. I'm going to record only what I say. And what I'm going to say is two things. First of all, I'm going to record the questions I ask you. And I'm going to record what I think you said in answer to each of those questions. So literally, I ask, you respond, I repeat what I think you said, then you correct me. It's a great technique because it puts the control of that back in the hands of the other person. So what I record then is what I thought he said, which is literally like any field note. But in this case, he's going to be able to correct me if he doesn't. And he said, well, that's not quite what I was driving at. And that's often. He says it again. Frankly, I think it's pretty close enough for my purposes. But he says something a little differently, and I say, okay, I get it. The emphasis should be more on such and such. Okay, how quick that is? I don't collaborate. Because I don't want to talk very long, because it's going to drag him if I do all this long collaborating. So I listen to him talk for 2 minutes. Then I synopsize it into 15, 20 seconds by just dealing with the high spots and saying it quickly. He was having to think and organize his thoughts. All I got to do is remember. And I got a fairly good short-term memory. Terribly short anymore now that I'm getting older. But if I can get it back pretty fast, I can get that checked. Sometimes when I get the stuff back from my transcriber, in fact, I typically send it to Michigan. Do you know who? Geneva. I send it to Geneva, and Geneva types it up, sends it back to me, and I look at it and I say, my gosh, gee, we got into more stuff than I thought we did. I don't even remember it that way. See, that's the point of field notes. You're getting it promptly, you're getting it down, you're getting it in a recordable form, and then you can analyze it. You're going to have to do that shortening somewhere. You might as well control it yourself.
This, he isn't inhibited in answering your questions when he knows that you're going to replay it back to him, like that?
No, he's going to be happy. Generally speaking, you'll find that people are very happy because they know they're going to hear back what they've said and gives them a chance to correct it. It's amazing how many people have to touch it up a little bit because you don't quite emphasize what they want to emphasize. But that's useful data.
Yeah.
And it's never a controversial thing. Fine, okay, I get it. And I'll have to cut him off sometimes because he starts collaborating through the whole thing. So let me try this, George. I think what you just said is so-and-so and so-and-so. Right? Ready to go. And we move to the next question, or the next theme, or the next probe. Now, that is a similar technique for the telephone interview that the face-to-face interview is when you go to your privacy of the car or to some closet. I will quite often, when I'm visiting a strange institution, find some little non-used place, arrange with some kind of a secretary. I mentioned to you one of the secrets of my competency all these years is that I always find the secretaries to be people that I really cultivate acquaintance with and friendship with, and bring little gifts and do little things and send little cards. Because secretaries are great. You show up and say, well, I want to do some interviews here in the school today, and I'm going to need a little quiet place to duck into about every hour or so to do a little bit of tape recording. You got a nice quiet, oh sure, use this room right in here. We have a little table and chair in there, and that's where we store our supply of Xerox paper. You'll find that comfortable going there. Great, couldn't ask for better. So after every interview, I go ducking into this silly closet, close the door, tape record for a few minutes, come back out again, catch the next interview. Am I giving you some visualization of how this stuff can be operationalized? We do a lot more of that kind of thing. We practice it in 923. But touching the high spots here, because you're going to need it for procedure.
That means if you're scheduling a series of interviews like that, you need to schedule the time to do field notes in between those
You betcha.
interviews.
Yeah, in fact, I will never interview more than once per hour. Because the interview itself may run long. And I will typically plan a 20 to 30 minute interview. And I'll ask for 20 to 30 minutes.
If you did a telephone interview like that, would that satisfy the needs of the physical being with the participant?
There's an awful lot of research being done that way today. The biggest problem is that it's harder to build rapport and break through when you're not there in person. So it helps an awful lot if you are known to the person you're interviewing, or your role is well known, or you're working for some organization that they have a responsibility to. Now, like the research I was doing was on contract with the Association of Bible Colleges, and it dealt with their accreditation. They all knew it, and they wanted to cooperate. But I've done this sort of thing with people that weren't all that cooperative. The trick is you send them a nice, polite, short memo in advance saying, I'm going to call you on such and such a day or week for an appointment that we can talk for about 20 minutes or 30 minutes about something or other, and the something or other better be something they're interested in. Because we're not going to give you time to talk about the Mets, if they're Cubs fans. It's got to be something they're really interested in. And if you say, I am a doctoral student from Trinity, and I'm doing a dissertation, that's quite often a, oh, sure, great. Oh, he needs another doctoral student. In other words, it's not in and of itself all that impressive to busy people. You represent a threat to their time. So there are some real problems there in relationships that have to be talked through. Yes? Questions, observations, comments?
What about using the tape recorder tactic that you described over the phone in person?
You can. Just doesn't work very well. The reason it doesn't work very well is because it's a visual distractor. Because you've got to, and pretty soon you'll find people just haunted with that, and it's hard to keep them on track. When I'm doing it this way, They're not even hearing the clicks. I'll just do it as natural conversation. George, I think what I understand from what you're saying is so-and-so and so-and-so. See? In other words, I'm just carrying on the conversation, but recording the back feed from my side. And pretty soon he loses track of the fact that that's what I'm doing. What I'm really doing is what many people teach in communication as a good technique. It's called doubling. When you give back to the person the information they've given you, you've doubled the information. In effect, that's an affirmation stroke, regarded as a confidence builder in communication. It's like, if you're having trouble with your wife or something, and you say, what I hear you saying is so and so and so. That's right. Why haven't you paid attention to me before? And it's kind of a relieving thing. Person saying, finally, you're listening to me. So it's kind of a good technique. Try it with your wife sometime and find out what it means. Any other questions or problems associated with this? Let me give you a few general suggestions. Somebody found in the textbook the term population validity. And it's kind of humorous today because Muriel came across this more often than I did, so she kept saying, here's another one. I said, what's that, population validity? She says, yeah. She says, first one, she says, Ted, what does population validity mean? And I said, gee, I don't know. And she says, well, this person is using it, and it's in as if the person knew what they're talking about. And I said, well, I don't know. I don't know everything, and maybe I missed something. Let me look. So we had our Campbell stand, or our Gorgon doll in front of us. I cracked it open as a table of contents, and I said, by golly, there is a thing here. It's on page so-and-so. In fact, it's 2 different places in the book on population validity. And I read the page to her, quarter page, and I got about the third sentence, and I said, oh, for crumb's sake. This is an old-fashioned term that is still useful, but what's happened here is that Borg and Gall have tried to make it more meaningful by reversing it. And it then has to be explained. It isn't population validity, it's sample validity. And when they talk about population validity, then they turn it back around and explain that it's sample validity. Furthermore, it's exclusive to experiment. So what in the world does it show up in your paper on descriptive? And several of you used it. Ultimately she put circles around them with a question mark. Frankly, I didn't find many of them. Maybe I just overlooked them. But look it up if you want to, but let me tell you what it's all about. Does a sample need to be a valid representation of a population? That's what they mean by population validity. Where would you talk about that? Would you talk about that in the population section or in the sample section? Right. And if you talk about it in the sample selection, what are you actually going to talk about? Validity of the population? No. Validity of the sample in reference to representation of the population. It's the same old trend we talked about the other day, which is selecting your sample so that it is representative of the population. Would you believe that phenomenon is what in Borg and Gall is called population validity? I'd never noticed that before. And they explain it correctly. 4 places, they start out by saying that it's in reference to experimental studies. So on 2 grounds, I gotcha. Number 1, it doesn't pertain to descriptive research. There is no such thing as a valid population in either case. You either have a population or you don't. Now this is a population, this class is a population. Could this population be described? Yes. Could it be assessed for its validity?
We're valid from here.
Yeah, some of you may not be all here. In which case you may be invalid. How many of you feel invalid today? You got it. Okay, so that clears that one up. So I want to straighten you out on that one if I could. The rule on first names. In the style of writing that we're using, which is formal, scientific, you may or may not use first name at your pleasure. But you cannot change your style willy-nilly. So you can refer to Einstein as Albert Einstein or Einstein. You cannot refer to him as a Einstein or Einstein, comma, Albert. In the text, you talk about this person as Einstein. Einstein said, Einstein wrote, Einstein was. Got it? Now, the subtlety of that rule is this. If you use the first name, you can use it only once per chapter. Well, I want to mention Einstein 5 times. How does it look in mention number 1? Albert Einstein. How does it look in mention number 2? Einstein. And 3, Einstein. And 4, Einstein. And 5, and Einstein. And 69, Einstein. And 70, Einstein. Got it? Starting the new chapter or section, do I have a choice? No, because I've already committed myself to the mention the first time. So the first time it appears, how does it look? You've got Albert back again. The logic of that is this. In scientific work, you don't put non-useful stuff in text. And it's literally non-useful to repeat the first name. Now, if you want to be utterly safe, so you never have to think much about it, what do? Just don't use it at all. It's perfectly legitimate. Perfectly legitimate. It's cold as a cranberry to do it that way. I think it always helps to use the first name the first time. Furthermore, it helps to alert you on the gender. Because if you don't say Margaret Johnson, you'll end up saying Johnson, he said, and then he did such and such and such and such, and people later say, that he you're talking about there is named Margaret. So I think it's a good idea just to keep you on the straight and narrow in terms of the correct gender to use for your pronouns. Does that make sense? So what is my suggestion? Use the first name on the first time citation in every chapter. Now that citation does not mean the formal citation as in the parenthesis citation. Do you use the first name in the parenthesis citation? Never. Unless there's more than one. In which case you would at least use the initial if that's a differentiator. For example, I got John Smith and Margaret Smith, Smith J. and Smith M. What if I got 2 publications in the same year from Margaret Johnson? I use A and B, however they lie in the bibliography. And I don't have to put it in the bibliography A and B. I just put the date, and there's 2 from 1998. And as I use this one, it's always 1998A, which then directs me back to the bibliography. Another thing about this, and this is kind of not on my list of concerns, but some of you didn't seem to realize how much space you save, time you save, and patience of the reader you save if you don't endlessly repeat the bibliographic stuff. Margaret Johnson, in her wonderful book entitled Seeing Rainbows Under Every Seashell, Dutton and Brothers, 1993, Schenectady, New York. Come on, wait a minute. Whoa! Where do you put all that detail on the book? In the bibliography, please. Now, what do I need in the body of the text?
Name and year.
Name and year. Unless it's a quote, in which case I need name and year and page. Thank you very much. Now, if I've already got her cited here once, M. Johnson, and then 10 lines later, before I mention anybody else, I bring in another quotation from her that's on page 32. Now what do I need at that point? 32.
So even if you said 10 sentences later.
No matter where, as long as it's the next. In other words, it hasn't been interrupted by another reference to another person or another citation from another person. But even if I had that, all I have to do is the Johnson again, and then the page.
If
But
the
is
sentence,
Sorry.
if the sentence has Johnson in it, Johnson states, then you don't need Johnson in just a year in the
It's
page.
generally regarded as poor style to do that instead of giving the full citation the first time. So the first time in a context, it's a good idea to give the full. If I said, Margaret Johnson is one of our best sources for information about the Holocaust. Johnson, see, I already said Margaret. Johnson says, quote, comma, double indent, blah, 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 blah. Now what do I put at the bottom of that double indent?
Year and page.
See, I haven't given a citation yet. All I've given up here is
Yeah, you need everything.
Johnson. I need the whole show down here. Because I need the whole show the first time.
Okay, what if you said?
Now, I don't know of many editors that will really quibble about that. And I know in our doctoral reviews here, we don't quibble. If you've got that, they'll go for the partial, just the date and then the page.
What if you said up top, Johnson, parentheses, 1993, states, and you go on.
Yeah.
At the end, you just, this is a
Then
quote,
just a
we're
page
not
at the-
talking about a quote, then later on you quote. Just
Yeah,
a page
the-
number.
This is one that editors differ on, and I'll tell you where I stand and why, and take it from there. I don't mark up, down, or sideways on it. But I think it disturbs the flow of reading to split the citation like that. Because what I'm going to do is split Johnson, parentheses 1983, says, you know, Johnson, 1983, is our best source of material on the Holocaust. Okay? And then when I get the citation here, I don't need to repeat the Johnson because I've already given it to you, so I just give you the date and the page number. Well, I've split the citation. I've split the flow of reading. So I've created two splits that I could have solved by putting the whole citation at the end of the quotation. Does that make sense? That's that's one of those debatable areas.
Is it required to shorten the second references? I mean, see, I'm afraid.
Why don't you do the whole show every time?
Yeah. That's what I prefer. I'm afraid of creating orphans if I edit and,
Yeah.
in the process.
And then you start moving things. That is a problem, or a potential problem. And one of the things about New Scientific Style is that we try to make it easy for things to be moved in blocks. And yeah, you run a risk there. I think you have a judgment call, and I certainly wouldn't get excited about one way or the other, unless you had a whole page full of different pages from the same source, and you felt obligated to give the author and the date each time. I'd probably say, this is getting to be silly. It's a judgment call. A couple other things I'll tick off here. These are things I picked up, and I thought maybe speeding back to all of you on these would help, because so many of you have trouble with this. What is wrong with this sentence? It is a nice day. What is wrong with that sentence? And believe me, it is an example of bad style. Just as surely as the sentence I just gave you to make that point. What was wrong with it?
The use of it, followed by is.
Followed by is. In both cases, it is, believe me, it is a bad object. What part of speech is it in terms of technical analysis of English words?
State of being.
Huh?
Verb, state of being.
It?
No, I thought you said is.
Excuse me, it.
Pronoun.
She is.
It's a pronoun. It's a pronoun. Can you name any other pronouns? He, she,
We, they.
we, they, our, their, us. What's wrong with pronouns?
Refer back and so forth.
They're indistinct. I think it's time we get going here. Who am I talking to? I'm not sure. Is he talking to me? Is he talking to us? Is he talking, who's he saying? What's going on? I think it's time we get going. Who, me, If you want to really stir up the troops in non-productive ways, use a lot of pronouns. thought I made that clear to you. Who's he talking to? Now, you can get away with a lot of pronouns in a face-to-face situation and in a speaking situation. I tell you, on the strength of the holy word of God, that we have a problem. No question who the we is there. It's all of us, right? But you read that, you might think that it's the pastor and his wife. Right? That's a good we. You know, who's he talking about? Pronouns are deadly because they contribute to confusion. And certain pronouns not only contribute to confusion, but they are empty. Can you give me an example of an empty pronoun? It does not communicate gender. It does not communicate, believe it or not, even a sense of quantity. It! Now then, if you have such an empty, weak, short, meaningless word as it, and you leave, do I ever write it is? Yes. Perfectly legitimate. But you have to understand it's a very weak sentence. You have sacrificed the power of the subject and the power of the verb. And it would be a lot safer to use that within the paragraph, buried away someplace, in order to get on with the idea. It allows you to say some things very quickly. It is perfectly legitimate, but please have the grace not to start a paragraph with an it is. And the close neighbor is there is, T-H-E-R-E. Now, what do you know about there, T-H-E-R-E? Did any of you have those?
I do.
What does the word there, T-H-E-R-E, mean actually? It means, you know, the chair is here. That chair is there. In other words, it's a remote word right to start with. And we use it in an absolutely non-meaningful way when we say there is. Is it a legitimate English phrase? Yes. Does it have any communicative power? Very little. It's a throwaway. Don't do it. Now then, the other one. And that's the one that we were preparing to confess here from Congo, right?
Yeah.
Is what? Would you read it to us, please?
Yeah. This is an inquiry into two organizations.
This is an inquiry into two organizations. Does that seem like a reasonable statement? Can you imagine a person getting up on a platform and saying, ladies and gentlemen, this is an important evening?
Yes.
Makes a good sermon. Good way to get started. What's the content there? Amen! No content, lots of amens. Absolutely empty. This is an important evening. I tell you, ladies and gentlemen, this is an important evening. No, that's a chair. Pardon me, ladies and gentlemen. This is a chair. The point is that this can be used in oral speech. I tell you, this is a real distraction. You follow me? You had no trouble with that at all. It was full of meaning because I added the nonverbal designation so you knew what this was. This is an important point. Now you don't know what I'm talking about. Unless you say, well, maybe he's talking about the very point we're talking about. But you can't be sure. So I always want to know it what? This what? And I think it's a reasonable question. Why do I want you to pay attention to these little matters of writing? Why?
Sake of clarity.
For the sake of clarity, and there are really two parts to this question. There are two important values at stake. Somebody says, why do you spend so much time on writing and all this stuff in that research class? Because I'm trying to help you develop competencies as a researcher. And those competencies include two particular domains. Clarity of thought. Clarity of thought. I've already mentioned here, snidely, sarcastically, with bad spirit, that I get sick and tired of people who just blow words. On paper or orally. At least orally, I know what to call it. On paper, I don't know what to call it. It's just bad writing. You've got to be able to organize your head. That's the big issue. You've got to be able to organize your head. And if you really understand the human brain and human thinking and human reasoning, think, watch me close on this. The most important way the mind is developed is through its use of language. Reasoning depends extensively on use of language. The human brain is as dumb as a non-programmed computer. All the stuff is there, but there are no meaningful connections until language. Now, if I am very concerned then about how you reason, I'm going to be concerned about what kind of language and what precision of language you are using to reason with about matters of all sorts, where any kind of sequence is important, any kind of logical dependency is important, and all the stuff that we think of in research in terms of handling orderly data. All that stuff has to be organized and precisely regulated. There is one other reason, and that is that ultimately, in addition to this reasoning problem, to be effective as a researcher, you're going to have to be able to do what with words and language? You're going to have to be able to communicate effectively on an output basis, because you have a duty to communicate to the research community. So you've got to be able to precisely describe your research. Furthermore, within the research community, you need to seek counsel and ultimately authorization to do a research. And it is not acceptable simply to be able to talk it through and explain it orally. Several times in writing comments on these papers, I found myself saying to you, do you really believe that somebody could do this on the basis of what you have described? The issue is you've got to be able to get things into a linguistic form that allow the people that are reading your plan for research to replicate the research without you. You can't be there to show them. That's the criterion. That's the other reason why we've got to be concerned about language. All right, now enough for the apologetics. Now let's get down to a little more epistemology here. Ideally, what kind of a sentence do you want to use, especially the front end of a sentence? One that's got a subject or a subject word or phrase that is ideally
A noun?
what about that noun? Got to be a noun or a pronoun. That's the rule of the language. What is going to be true? It's going to be something explicit. If you really want a powerful sentence, use an explicit subject, not a big foggy generalization. What kind of a verb would you use? Huh? And particularly an active one that shows some action or describes some action. He did it. John, once again, struck the ball in such a way that he had a home run. Now, which of those sentences, he did it, or that other one, which is more powerful? Do you detect the difference? What's involved? Struck the ball. What kind of a verb is that? It's pretty active. You can almost hear it. Over against, did it. No action, no sound, nothing there. Questions? Comment?
Yeah.
maybe you're going to get to, it comes to the question of active and passive.
Yeah, this is a moot point. Ask your question and state the problem, and we'll show you how you weasel on that.
The problem, especially when you take away first-person writing, is that
That's right.
I don't know how to write without first person and stay active.
You can't. You can't. It does not always, you can't fulfill both of those rules thoroughly, simultaneously. But it's amazing how close you can come. It's just that most of us realize the limitations in situations where we're trying to say something that we find easier to say in first person. And you have to work at it a little bit to think of another way to say it. But they're there. There are other ways there. And it does not ultimately become that much of a handicap. But you're right. You put your finger right on one of the key problems. And that is that there are some cross purposes in those two generalized rules. But one of them is in interest of scientific objectivity. And the other is in the interest of specific action or clarity. And you sacrifice the latter, especially in terms of activity or action.
Excuse me, but I didn't catch it. I mean, using active tenses is normally always better than passive. You understand that?
No, what I'm saying is it is not if it causes you to violate the first person rule. It's better to violate the action versus passive tense.
First person.
I mean, for
But
instance,
there's a
in this
lot of
one-
action in what is, you see, the old anxiety about passive tense used to be the way writing teachers and other grammarians would say, let's get more action in the before the lady was on the stage 30 minutes, she was sawn in half. Is that active or passive? In other words, think of the whole picture, the whole communication, not just the verbal structure. And suddenly some of these old rules become just a little bit irrelevant. And I would call that passive voice as an old rule. Colon, C-O-L-O-N. How many of you can define it? No. I mean the one on the paper. Well, I say, you have to watch some of you guys. All right? One on the paper is a dot over a dot, right? Or more precisely, all right? That's a colon. Got it? Misusing the colon is a very common problem in writing, unless you have been urged to think about it and to notice that there really are some style rules that pertain. The colon is used correctly when it ends a completed thought. That's criterion 1. Ends a completed thought and connects to some list or fulfillment following. Listen. The characteristics of a disciple are colon, love, hospitality, correct or incorrect? Incorrect. Criterion 1 for the use of a colon is the colon is used after a thought completely stated in order to connect it to a fulfillment. And what I said was, characteristics of a disciple are, and then I listed love, hospitality, and whatever else. All right. Now, why is this use of the colon incorrect? By the way, that is your most common one that you folks throw in now and then, many of you. Why is that wrong?
But that is thought preceding thought.
Ask yourself, is that the complete thought? Aha. In closing, I would like to remind you, as we have developed this sermon on disciples, that the characteristics of a disciple are. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Do you have a sense that something didn't quite finish up there? Now, am I allowed to say this? The characteristics of a disciple are love, hospitality, and after I lavish this on, can I then sit down? Yeah. But when I put it in print, that comes out. Don't need it. Don't even need a comma. The list, in fact, finishes the sentence. Well, then when can I use the colon? It's got to be a completed thought connected by the colon to a fulfillment. There is. I'll give you a wonderful sentence. There is great respect for the Father of this country. Can I do that? And there's only 2 words that I can use after that. It's used to connect the completed thought to its fulfillment or its explication or some kind of a list. Now that could be plural. The 3 great signers of the Declaration of Independence were colon. Will that work? No. The 3 great signers of the Declaration of Independence are still remembered today. Colon. Benjamin Franklin, John Hancock, and Albert Einstein. Right. Or somewhere spread. In general, get out of the habit of using the colon. Just get out of the habit. So that you add it back in only when you're sure of it. It's a bad habit. Etc. 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 ETC is a shortening for a Latin term, et cetera. Would you believe that this is et cetera? Would you believe this is et cetera? This is what you might call pure Latin. This is called pig Latin. It's used by people who write as a kind of a code word. It's a code word that says, I've already listed several things and now my brain is tired and I'm going to quit. Etc. I've listed several things, but my brain is tired, so I'm going to quit. All right? Every time you see etc. from now on, I hope you'll remember that. Somebody is confessing their brain is tired. Well, what's wrong with saying and so forth? That's what it literally means. And such and such. Or literally, and other such things.
You want to know what they are.
Yeah, for heaven's sake, what kind of communication is that? You know? What can you tell me about the possibilities for the Bears this season, you know? Well, I can tell you many, many things. How's that make you feel? You know, come on, let's get specific. That's what etc. doesn't do. It doesn't get specific. It just says there are other things. But people usually compound the problem by saying there are such things as apples and oranges and peaches, etc. In which case, etc. is totally unnecessary because The introductory things said such things as, or for example. There are many qualities in a good life, such as honesty, warmth, etc. My brain's tired. I quit thinking. So every time you see ETC, remember that it's Latin for my brain is tired. That will help discourage the use of etc. Because in scientific work especially, it is just plain bad news. It's your task. You know, you're supposed to be telling us something. Line by line, phrase by phrase, tell us something. Okay. And one that some of you have been reading about and you've picked up on, and I wish I knew where because I'd like to straighten you out text line by line, is participant